So today, guys, I want to talk to you about average and why being average is not an option. And if that sounds a little bit bold, well, then not the good, because the truth is, hey, welcome to Wow Words of Wisdom. This is the podcast where we talk about all things mindset, all things confidence, and taking action, even when it feels scary. I'm Sharon McCaffrey, and if there's one thing I know for sure, it's this. Your mindset shapes everything. The way you think, the way you show up, the way you go after what you really want, and it all starts in your head. So if you've ever felt stuck, doubted yourself, or wondered if you're really capable of more, you're in the right place. Each week, let's break through those mental blocks, shift your perspective, and start making things happen. I didn't come here to help anyone to stay stuck. And I say that with the fullest of respect because I know what being stuck feels like. And I've been there, I remember like being in debt. I remember like avoiding the bills or like, coming in the door where someone was always in knots every time that like, a letter came through post. And then my avoiding personality would make me like ignore them for weeks. And I was hoping something would shift, but I was scared and I was also embarrassed because I didn't want anyone to know. But I was also getting exhausted by my own avoidance. And I still remember that so vividly. And what happens is, you hit a point where the pretend actually gets heavier than the truth. And for me, that moment, it came and, and with that voice in my head that like, I think any that's been following me for a while will know that I spent 3 days, like, sitting at home feeling sorry for myself, watching crap TV and drinking lots of wine. And, as I always say, the Lord Jesus Christ rose on the third day. And I'm not religious at all, but like I rose on the third day. And it was on that third day where I went, like, nobody's coming to save me. Like, there's nobody coming to fix this for me. And that might sound harsh, but if I'm being honest, it kind of gave me a little bit of peace, maybe for want of a better word, because once I accepted that it was down to me, then I can finally take responsibility. Not in a like a self-blaming way, but like in a, I suppose, more grounded adult way. I can say, right, this is mine. I need to own it. And that means then if I own it, well then I can change it. And it was done outsourcing my life to chance or hoping that someone else would, come and save me. And I think that's the first step in choosing something more than average. You stop waiting for life to happen and you start building it on purpose. If you're listening right now, you're thinking, I'm not where I want to be, but I don't know how to move forward. Well, let me tell you this. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to stop pretending that average is okay with you, that being stuck, being small, being broke, being burnt out or overlooked is just how it is. It's not. You might be carrying stories that say you can't do more because of your age, because of your background, your finances, your confidence, that these stories they're old and you've got to change. And I was listening to something earlier today and you were talking about like imposter syndrome and how imposter syndrome said that, oh, I got imposter syndrome. I don't feel I could do that. But that imposter syndrome is actually just a story that we tell ourselves. It's just an excuse that we make in our head to talk ourselves out of doing something that maybe we're afraid to do. I read this earlier and let me find it here on my phone for you guys. I thought it was just really relevant. We live in a world whereby we are conditioned to survive, not thrive. And if you're surrounding yourself with people who are surviving, you will never thrive. Iron sharpens iron. And I thought that was just so relevant to this topic and this episode here today. So I suppose the next part, like obviously that was the turning point for me. And, once I'd accepted truth that nobody was coming to fix it, then I realized something else. If my life is going to change, it had to start with small, quiet choices, not big, dramatic ones, just the next right thing. So I didn't start with a 5-year plan or some 10 steps to success list. I started with my bank account. I opened it properly. I looked at every figure. I made myself sit with the numbers instead of avoiding them. I give myself permission to feel whatever came up, shame, fear, frustration. And then I reminding myself that, you are allowed to be here and you're allowed to get out. So I had to, strip everything back. You know, what did I really want? What actually really mattered? Because average doesn't mean just money. It's not just a number in the bank account. It's a life where you're constantly cutting your own needs last, where you're actually reacting, to situations and circumstances and people instead of you creating, where your best energy goes into, keeping up appearances instead of building something that actually matters to you. And I think, social media really leads us down that, rabbit hole where people put so much energy into pretending and making things look good. Like the filters in itself, prove that point. So what I started doing was I started learning. I started reading, I started listening, I started asking questions. I studied more. I studied business, I studied money, I studied psychology, all of it, and there were moments when I could have just gone to bed, but I chose to do one more thing instead. And, that's what this process really is. It's a quiet, consistent refusal to stay where you are. So what does average really cost? I think we're being taught to make average look reasonable, that it's safe, that it's normal. But if I'm being really honest with you, it's not safe to live beneath your potential. I don't think it's safe to have to strive every week and every month. Like it slowly drains you. It drains your self trust. It feels resentment. It leaves you wide awake at night wondering why you're still stuck when you know you're capable of so much more. And yet most people stay there. They don't stay there because they're lazy, though, because they've gotten used to shrinking. And here's what I learned. You can't wait until you feel ready. You need to act first and then the confidence follows, not the other way around. And I think so many people, they wait for perfection before taking action, they wait for the right time, the right age, the right amount of money in the bank account before they start. But the irony is that you actually have to take the action first, even though you're not ready. But then everything else follows and the confidence follows too. So, I wasn't ready when I made my first uncomfortable business decision, or, when I put myself, out on social media for something that I felt completely, out of my league, but I did it anyway. I remember the first time I recorded a podcast that my hands were shaking. They don't shake now. And I'd learned so much. I still think I've lots to learn. I don't think I'm amazing at it by any stretch of the imagination, but I do feel like getting better versus that very, first one or for second one. But it is just come as a result of me taking action first. And I certainly feel a lot more confident with them. Um, and then what starts to happen over time then is these little small incremental practices and processes, for me, slowly my life started to change. And it's not because I became someone else, but it's because I finally stopped pretending to be less than I am. And for any of you that have ever listened to me, you know that I grew up in a farm in Monaghan, and I don't think I was ever destined to be farmers and my mother or father never thought that. And I didn't think so either. But there's a few things that the farm does teach you. Those are, if the fence is broken, you fix it. If the animal needs fed, you feed it, whether you feel like it or not. And if you fall, you get back up. Like in farming, there's no space for self-pity, in that word. And I don't mean that in a harsh way, but in a practical way. And it's the same in life. Like life doesn't wait for you to feel good. You do the work and the progress follows. And I do carry that with me to this day. I watched my parents when I was younger like that. Like if the fence is broken, they went and they fixed it. If they didn't, the animals are all going to get out. So, and there's something deeply grounding about remembering, where you come from. I wouldn't say I was necessarily raised to chase success, but I was raised to show up and do what needs to be done. And I think that mindset helped me rebuild. And if you're in a rebuilding season now, let me say this to you very, very clearly. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're just in a chapter, and chapters change when you do. And I compare it to like the four seasons. You're always in a cycle. These chapters are cycles, winter, spring, summer, autumn. Like, it's which season are you in? And the seasons don't necessarily fall in line with the seasons of the year. But like when you're in your winter, like when I was like feeling really, really sorry for myself and looking down a dark bowl with my debt and stuff, I was in my winter. But the springtime came when I started to change and I got into a different cycle, and that, like obviously build my business, the success and stuff that came with that got me into my summer. But I understood that winter would come again, maybe not as harsh as the previous winter, but that's the thing that you need to understand, that these chapters and these cycles, would always keep happening. You just need to identify where you are and understand that the same way as the seasons change, chapters change, but they only change when you do. And then I suppose, the next part is, it's that reality slap. All right. And, this is going to sound a little bit uncomfortable, but, the reality slap is the moment that you realize you're the one in your own way. And again, I'm not saying that to be harsh. I say it because it was true for me. And if somebody had told me 20 years ago that I was wasting time blaming the wrong things, I might have actually moved faster. And here's what it looked like for me. And I'm surely, there's probably lots of you out here can identify, with this. Like, I blamed my circumstances, the debt, the stress, the pressure. I blamed my age, telling myself I'd missed the boat. I blamed not having the right network, and sometimes I even blamed other people's success, quietly resenting them while pretending that I didn't care. But if I look deep underneath the bonnet, what was really going on is that I was just scared. I think what I was scared about is I was scared to take full responsibility, because then I couldn't hide anymore. And that's the reality slap. The moment you stop pointing outwards and start looking inwards, it's very confronting, but it's also very free. If you're the problem, then you're also the solution. And that's where your power is in taking ownership. So I always say, when you're pointing one finger at someone or something else, there's three fingers pointing back at you. So if you're listening to this and part of you is thinking, I know I've been holding back, this isn't a call out, it's more like a calling. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to try again. You're allowed to want more, even if your life looks okay on the surface. So start looking at, what are you in control of? What can you change? Who can you stop blaming, or what can you stop blaming? If you've come to the realization that you're to blame, and you're the only person holding yourself back, that's all well and good. But it's like, how do you rise above the average? So what do we actually need to do? How do you move from knowing you're meant for more, to living it? So here's a few steps that really changed everything for me. And the first one, and I've told about, was getting brutally honest about where I was. So there was no sugarcoating it, no filters. I wrote it down. I looked at the bank account. I took stock of my routines. I took stock of my energy, my relationships. Because what you need to understand is, if you're not willing to tell yourself the truth, you'll stop trying to fix the wrong thing. The second thing then that I done is decided who I wanted to be, not just what I wanted to have. And I think what we do sometimes, we focus so much on goals, we focus on the highest, the income, the title, but ask yourself, who do I need to become to create that life? And for me, that meant becoming someone who made decisions from a place of self-worth, not fear, someone who followed through even on small promises. That was a full identity shift, and it didn't happen overnight, but it started with intention. For me, it meant, being mindful of who I was spending my time with. It meant, being more aware of my routines, my health routines, my exercise, all those sort of things. And then the next thing was, like, rather than like doing the next biggest thing, I didn't think like that. I just thought, do the next right thing. So the next right thing, not the biggest thing, not the flashiest, just the next right step. So, for me, and, like, it was like, looking for help, i.e. like, reading books instead of scrolling, making networking calls, I'd been avoiding, and what happens is, over time, small actions compile with evidence, and that evidence turns into confidence, because now you can take that evidence out of your little rucksack and go, done it before, so I can do it again. I think sometimes we overwhelm ourselves because we just think about, like, oh, I need to make all these big grand gestures. No, you just need to do the next thing. And this would be something I would challenge you, over the next 30 days. is that like when something pops into your head that, when you get that gut feeling that you should do something, just to act upon it straight away and don't cut it off. The next thing that I really made sure that I done is getting around people who don't let you play small. If everyone in your circle is content complaining or coasting, you will be too. I ran a whole podcast on you are the average of the 5 people that you hang out with the most. If you hang out with 5 smokers, your likelihood of becoming a smoker is a lot higher. So you need to find people who speak like life into your ideas, but they also challenge your excuses. I'm very fortunate within my industry that I've accessed lots of mentors and stuff. But this particular mentor that I know within my network that I speak to occasionally, but I understand that if I speak to him on a regular basis, he would really push me. And I actually messaged him this morning, and I have a call with him every Tuesday now going forward to 7:30 a.m. But I done that because I know he's going to really put me out of my comfort zone, and he's going to challenge excuses that I have in my head, and it's going to make me think bigger. And I need you to understand, I didn't grow up in a world of entrepreneurs or big dreamers, but I find them. I find them online, I find them in books, in podcasts. I built my own circle, one person at a time, and you can do the same. And it's like I said on that message earlier that I read, we live in a world whereby we are conditioned to survive, not try. If you are surrounding yourself with people that are surviving, you will never try. And then the next thing I done was like remind myself that this isn't a race, but it is my responsibility. Like there's no deadline, there's no perfect timeline, but this is your life. No one else can live it for you. I always say, like, in order for your dreams to live, somebody else's has to die. And your life is like a canvas. Don't give the paintbrush to somebody else. You don't have to burn your life down to rise above average. You just have to stop settling for a version of life that keeps you small. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be present and willing to start. And remember, you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from experience. So just to wrap this up and to give you, like a few little takeaways, I want to leave you with this, that like average isn't bad, but it's not where you're meant to stay. So if you're listening to this, you're likely someone who's carried a lot, for a long time. You probably kept things going, you survived, and now it's time to build something beyond survival. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, but you do owe it to yourself and maybe to the younger version of you to at least try. So today, just take one step, write the truth, speak the thing you've been afraid to say. I remember from mentor years ago who told me we generally end up doing everything other than the thing that we need to do. So ask yourself honestly, what would it look like if I stopped settling? Because average is not an option. Not anymore. So just a quick one before you go. Over 100 million people listen to podcasts on a daily basis. And while so many come looking for personal growth, most never actually hit follow. So if anything in this episode helped you to see things differently, to feel a bit stronger, or just breathe easier, then do me a massive favor and hit follow right here where you're listening. This means that you'll never miss an episode that might be exactly what you need to hear that day. And most importantly, the more this podcast grows, the more I can keep sharing real value and even open the door to bringing in incredible guests to support your journey. So thanks again for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode. And that's my words of wisdom for today's episode of Wow. I hope this gives you something to think about, because remember, your mindset shapes your reality. The way you choose to think today will impact what you create tomorrow. If you love this episode, let me know. Share it, tag me, or send me a message. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Catch you next time.